welcome to LawWiser. Today we would be discussing regulatory framework for ease of digital payments. We all know digital payments are deeply entrenched in our households today, and there has been regular updates from the regulators like RBI on payment intermediaries, regulatory sandbox. A lot of it is happening in this space. So we are going to try and understand what these regulations are and what their impact is on the payment regulatories. To understand this, we have an expert with us. We have Mr. Ugen Bhutia. He is Senior Vice President and Legal Head at SBI Card. Welcome again. Thank you for taking time out for us. So again, to start our conversation, we would first want to know, as you are aware that this space has been developed at a step-by-step process when it comes to digital, payment intermediaries. And in this light, if you can highlight certain regulations which have played a key role in the development of this sector.
Thank you for the question. Yeah, before I talk about the step-by-step process and the highlight in terms of the important regulations are concerned, I think I would like to touch upon the entire Government of India's flagship program, that's Digital India, because I think it's very important to lay emphasis and recognize the importance of this flagship program, which started with a vision to transform India into a digitally empowered society and a knowledge economy. Under the said program, way back in 2016, the government's key focus, was to basically address three structural pillars. Okay, the first one being the infrastructure, the second one being services, and the third one being empowerment. From an infrastructure perspective, we've showcased ourselves to the entire world, right? I think there is no doubt as such that we are at today, India is at par with the first world countries. We've seen the likes of Aadhaar, then DigiLocker, eSign on the infrastructure side. On the services side, we've seen BEAM, and on the empowerment side, we've seen AEPS, your UPI, Jan Dhan, your targeted public distribution system, right? Now, having said that particular kind of a backdrop, now I want to dwell upon, your question in terms of digital payment and the step-by-step approach. The digital payment landscape from a tech perspective has changed drastically over the, last, in fact, even if you only look at the last decade, we've seen that the landscape has changed considerably, and it has revolutionized the India's financial services, altogether. If you were to look, take for example, only the last decade, Aadhaar was introduced in 2010, followed by your AEPS, then thereafter your APBS, the Aadhaar eKYC, if I'm not mistaken, in 2012, Jan Dhan in 2014, your eSign in 2015, and 2016 being a very important year because that was the year when the entire payment bank, your DigiLocker, and above all, the demonetization came in, right? Which basically pushed the entire digital payment ecosystem, which was followed by obviously your UPI, BBPS, Bharat QR code, video KYC, the entire evolution of payment aggregator and payment gateway, the new umbrella entity, which we talked about sometime around last year. And as recent as on last Monday, the government has also, basically introduced something which is known as your e-rupee, right, on Monday. A lot of changes has been made in terms of the environment is concerned. Now, in order to keep up with the pace in terms of the environment is concerned, definitely it has to be backed by regulations and legislations, right? So what has been the entire focus in terms of the entire evolution? To the best of my understanding and belief, I can clearly see that, through these digital innovations, the clear focus is to digitize the entire payment ecosystem and also enhance the financial inclusion through digitization. The government has taken various steps and initiatives. Apart from that, I think a lot of expert committees have also been, formed, like the Wattle Committee. Interestingly, out here, I would like to call out is that even the regulators are also not very far behind, whether be it your regulatory sandbox, or for that matter, even in constituting expert committees like the Nandan Nilekani committee, which oversaw the deepening of digital payment. Okay, so a host number of initiatives have been taken on behalf of the government as well as the regulators, creating sandbox environments, which I've already mentioned about. Now, talking per se about regulation, I would say, like, before even I go into the specificities of what the regulations are, my generic understanding is that any kind of a regulation or any kind of a ecosystem which addresses four layers. Number one is the presenceless layer. Number two is a paperless layer. Number three is a cashless layer. And number four is a consent layer. Any kind of a regulation or any kind of a product which addresses these four layers would be important for the purposes of evolution of the entire digital payment ecosystem. Any regulation, which aims to tackle all these four layers, as I was mentioning, plays an immense and a very important role in terms of development of the entire payment landscape. In this context, some of the regulations now going into the specificities, which has actually fostered and helped the entire digital payment ecosystem, is definitely your Aadhaar, okay, which basically aims to tackle the paperless and the presenceless layer. Number two is your eKYC, the necessary changes in the Information Technology Act, the necessary changes in the Indian Evidence Act to recognize eKYC, which basically solves your presenceless layer. Okay, and to a certain extent, even your e-sign, which also addresses the same thing, your presenceless layer as well as the consent layer, and the relevant changes in your Information Technology Act, the relevant changes in your Indian Evidence Act to recognize e-sign as a consent. And then obviously there are other features like UPI, BBPS, BHIM, e-RuPay, which basically addresses the cashless layer. Okay, so overall, these are the kind of regulations I would say that the government as well as even the regulators have taken, which fosters the entire digital payment ecosystem.
Thank you again for actually sharing this in detail for our audience, to providing a background to this. Along with that, the step-by-step process and the layers that you've explained, this actually helps our audience understand how this, the regulation system actually works and what it caters to. So this takes us further to our next question, which is, for payment intermediaries, there have been certain regulations by the RBI. So if you can highlight or share some key regulations by RBI for payment intermediaries for us.
Sure. Like I was saying, a lot has been done in terms of the regulations are concerned, especially by RBI, even on the payment intermediary side. But however, before I come to the regulations per se, what I would like to mention is that as a part of the entire payment ecosystem, as I was mentioning, that we've seen a lot of evolution on the regulations as well, right? Right from the concept of payment banks being introduced in 2015, followed by UPI, BHIM, BBPS in 2016, and then the Bharat QR in 2017. We've seen a lot of evolution, right? Some of the key regulations definitely which has fostered the growth is definitely, as I was mentioning, the Aadhaar Act of 2016, though Aadhaar as a concept was introduced in 2010, but however, the act was introduced in 2016. But however, in 2016, when the Aadhaar, Act was introduced and the entire, we basically going forward in a very exponential kind of a growth, a little bit of a dampener was the Supreme Court judgment of the 26th of September 1998, which basically held certain provisions in the Aadhaar Act as well as the PMLA Act ultra virus. But having said that, with all due regard to the observations which have been passed by the Supreme Court, we came back in track because then we found alternate means taking into consideration the observations which have been passed by the Supreme Court, but at the same time, adjusting to the need of the hour, that the dynamic kind of a thing which was there, the need of the hour was there, right? So we'll basically introduce a video KYC, offline Aadhaar verification, and your QR code. Okay. Now, again, sorry for digressing a bit, but again, coming back to the payment intermediaries per se. Okay. Though RBI has over a time, period of time introduced various regulations, but however, the entire overarching backbone behind the regulations around payment intermediaries is the legislative backing that it has, under the Payment and Settlement System Act of 2007. Right. Once the act was promulgated in 2009, if I'm not mistaken, there was a circular which was introduced for payment intermediaries in 2009. But however, having said that, it was a very generic kind of circular. It covered the process and the operational legs, like operating through nodal accounts, permissible debits and credits in your nodal accounts, the time period for settlement of funds to merchants, etc. And as such, for a payment intermediary, there was no RBI license or an authorization which was even required under the said circular. So having said that, I think a lot of change in terms of the environment is concerned happened. And I think the need of the hour was to have some kind of a regulation around the payment intermediaries. And that is the reason why the regulation of payment aggregators and payment gateway was promulgated in 2020. Talking a little bit about, going into a little bit detail into this particular regulation. It's basically, it basically mentions about the various functioning of your payment aggregator, functioning of your payment gateway, the authorization, the registration requirement, your capital requirements, the governance, the entire governance structure, including your PMLA controls, the operational aspect of it, and last but not the least, the customer grievance mechanism and the dispute management framework that has also been put in terms of your regulations of your payment aggregator and your payment gateway is concerned. So these are by far some of the regulations which RBI has introduced in terms of payment aggregators are concerned.
Thank you again for actually highlighting these regulations for our audience. It just helps them in understanding, how this entire framework works for the payment intermediaries. And that takes us to our last question, which is that although, the regulations in this space are developing, but there would be, since it's still developing, there would be still certain requirements for changes in the system. So if you can share, what changes you think is required in the framework or that are likely to be seen, if you can share that for our audience.
Thank you. Thank you for posing this question. In fact, this is something which is very close to my heart. In the last 2-3 years or so, I have also been talking to various stakeholders, including the government as well as the regulators, in terms of streamlining this entire process from a wing-to-wing kind of a perspective is concerned. Okay. Now, so I go back to the entire exponential growth, like a 2B kind of a scenario in terms of this entire digital payment landscape is concerned. If I were to basically go back to that, what else do you require to make it a seamless kind of a process, a frictionless kind of a process? I go back to the 4 layers: paperless, presenceless, cashless, and the consent layer. If we were to come up with regulations, if we were to come up with initiatives to address all these 4 layers, then I think we would have arrived in terms of making the entire payment ecosystem very smooth, because for a payment, a digital payment kind of a thing, what is a competitor? Our competitor is cash, right? And in terms of cash is concerned, how does it work? The USP of cash is the ease of use. Okay, it's a frictionless kind of a process. So even if you were to basically bring in a payment kind of a ecosystem, it has to be as easy as taking out cash from your wallet. Okay, now talking about specificities in terms of what is it that we can further do in order to make this entire process, to streamline this entire process, make it as frictionless as possible. A couple of things which actually crops up to my mind is definitely number one, reviving the entire eKYC. Okay, 26 September, 2018, we take due regard to the observations which have been passed by the Supreme Court in the Aadhaar judgment, but taking into consideration the observation, we still go ahead with eKYC or Aadhaar, build a consent layer to it, so that in terms of the concerns of the Supreme Court in the observations are concerned, that is also being addressed. Okay, that's number one. Number two, OTP eKYC as of today is only permitted for certain small deposit and loan accounts. I think that should also be permitted for credit cards as well, right? OTP based eKYC. Thirdly is, as I was telling you, the cash in terms of the cashless layer is concerned. The ease of doing the USP of cash is basically take out cash and use it, right? Considerable thing has been done in terms of making a second factor authentication not mandatory in terms of even a credit card payment is concerned. Okay, from a 2,000 limit to a 5,000 limit, it has basically been enhanced by the regulators. But I think there's still some scope out there. Okay, and definitely the consent layer. Okay, what I understand is that data privacy and all those things, the bill should be able to address the consent layer. But apart from that, I've been also reading a lot about your data empowerment and your protection architecture, right? I understand that this is at a very nascent kind of a stage. If something can be done in order to expedite that, that would definitely be welcome for a financial services sector. And last but a very most important thing is that there has to be a common integration of all the KYCs. Today, we've got DigiLocker, we've got CKYC, we've got eKYC or the Aadhaar database, we've got Jandan, we've got Vahan, Passport, GST, NSDL. You name it, we've got everything. But all these things are lying in pockets, okay? So if everything can be brought about, I don't know whether blockchain would be the right kind of a mechanism or not, but if everything can be brought about or stitched about so that, there's a common repository of a KYC, it will not only make the lives of payment intermediaries much more easy from a PMLA perspective, but even from a consumer perspective, it will be very easy. Onboarding a customer would be a much more faster process as compared to the present kind of a scenario. Okay, I understand that from a lastly, from a regulator's perspective also, though I've been interacting with a lot of regulators, I understand their perspective that it is imperative to protect the interest of the customer and safeguard them against any fraud, account takeover, build in enough safeguards in terms of your PMLA and all those things are concerned. But however, having said that, I think there has to be a right balance between building such checks and at the same time facilitating building enablers to address this entire 4 layers in a frictionless process as possible, from a wing to wing kind of a thing. Thank you.
Thank you again. I guess you very perfectly have summed up this entire conversation for us. And, by not just highlighting right from the beginning to the background process and, the key regulations, along with the changes that are required. Because I guess you rightly said there needs to be a streamlining of all of this. Everywhere, everything is there. We have a lot of it, but it's all in pockets. It needs to be streamlined, and probably the government has to see what kind of technology needs to be applied to, streamline the process and make it easier for the customers as well, along with the payment intermediaries as well. Because this is probably one of the perfect times to have a, centralized system or a proper system set up for the payment intermediaries going ahead, because hereafter we will only see advancement in technology. It's going to get much more complex, in future. I guess these are one of the most interesting times that we are also living in. So thank you so much again. Thank you for sharing your thoughts and, your knowledge with us. Thank you.
Thank you for inviting. Thank you.